I'm Tyler Austin from Gungnir Strategic. Thank you so much for watching. So today I'm going to be starting a new video series that I think a lot of you are going to like. That's going to be CQB breakdowns. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take CQB footage and I'm going to break it down. I'm going to talk about things that are happening in the video that a lot of you may not understand in terms of like what they're actually doing at that particular moment and why. If you're not like in the know, so to speak, a lot of that can just kind of go over your head on terms of what they're actually doing and why they're doing it. So I'm going to discuss some of that. I'm going to obviously talk about some of the things I like in the video in terms of the tactics that they're utilizing and whatnot. And of course, I'm going to give my critiques too in terms of things they did that I thought could have been done better or in a different way and whatnot. So for the very first episode here, I'm going to do GBRS and the St. John Parish SWAT team. GBRS dropped this video like 3 or 4 months ago now, and I thought this would make for a fantastic first episode because when it comes to GBRS, they typically don't post a lot of actual CQB footage. But this video in particular is probably the one video they have out there where they show the most CQB footage. So I thought this would make for a great first episode. Of course, all credit goes to the video to GBRS. The link to the full video will be down in the description below, of course. So if you're interested, go watch that. The entirety of like the CQB portion of this particular video is like 7 or 8 minutes long. So I'm not going to show the entire thing. So what I ended up doing was I just cut out the particular clips that I wanted to discuss here, and we'll watch those so that way the video isn't too long. Anyways, with that being said, let's just go ahead and start the breakdown with our first clip. Cool. So they were going down a corridor, right? They were holding cross coverage or cross panning, if you want to probably use their terminology. So they were in cross coverage. Right was holding on the corridor on the left. Left was holding on the open room directly ahead of them. They got to a point where they need to exchange, so they did an angle exchange, and then left took the hallway. Right, and the number 3 man took the room directly in front of them. So the big thing I want to talk about here is what happened at the very end of this when they were clearing behind that barricade. So when they made entry, Right owns the dead space behind that barricade because he has the best angle on it. There's no angles behind that barricade that Left can see that Right hasn't already seen. Now with that being said, Left still has his muzzle down on that barricade. This isn't ideal, in my opinion, because he should be checked up. Body language is incredibly important when it comes to CQB. Your muzzle positioning and your body language is basically an unspoken conversation that you're having with your teammates. So when your muzzle is down, it means that you are holding on something, and that communicates that to teammates. So here, Left, there was nothing for him to hold on. Again, he didn't own any of the angles behind the barricade because that's Right's responsibility. And there was nothing else within that room that he needed to have his muzzle down on. So it's just bad body language and bad communication for him to have his muzzle down. This is particularly important under night vision and just low light conditions in general, because when it's in standard lighting conditions like this, Right can sit there and look at it and go, he has his muzzle down, but he can see the entire room, so he can look around and go, okay, there's nothing for him to actually be holding on. He's just making a mistake. But under night vision, things become a little bit more complicated, particularly because your field of view is much more limited and so forth. And even though you obviously have enhanced vision in darkness, things are still relatively dark. So it's a lot easier to miss things under night vision that you otherwise may have not have missed in standard lighting conditions. So this was under night vision. Right might be looking around going, what is he holding on that I don't see? Am I missing something? Is there like an open threshold somewhere that I'm just completely missing here? That body language becomes a lot more important, particularly under low light conditions. So when they made entry and Left immediately recognized that Right owns that dead space behind that barricade, he should immediately check up, and that signals to Right that there's nothing for him to hold on, Left that is, and Left is just going to be in a supportive role for Right as he clears that dead space. Now, some people might say, well, maybe he's holding behind that couch, and that would be a possibility. But again, Left's body language is saying otherwise. His body's oriented towards that barricade. His muzzle's bearing down on that barricade. And on top of that, his laser's on the barricade. So that immediately tells me that he's not actually holding or clearing behind that little bit of dead space that's created by the couch. He's oriented towards that barricade. Anyways, let's move on to the next clip. So the one thing I want to talk about here is what the guy on the support side, i.e. the guy who actually opened up the door, and what he did. So obviously they were able to tell that this room was corner fed from the very get-go on approach to the door. However, when he opened up the door, the guy on the right-hand side, i.e. the support side in this case, when he opened up the door, he brought his muzzle back down to bear, and he even sliced out the room with his muzzle down. Ideally, when he opens up that door and he immediately identifies that room as corner fed, i.e. he's able to see that shallow side wall, he should immediately check up. Again, body language. When your muzzle's down, it means you're holding on something. So, right in this case, if his muzzle stays down towards that corner, you're basically telling your teammate, hey, this is a center-fed room, or at the very least, there's a deep enough corner there where someone could be hiding, and therefore I need to be holding on it. But in this case, obviously that's not the case. So he should just check up because there's nothing along that wall that he needs to hold on. It's just the wall. So when he opened up the door, saw that shallow side wall, he should just immediately check up. And that allows left, in this case, i.e. the person on the security side, he's going to own the entire room. So he's just free to slice it out and make entry because he owns the entire room at that point. He can see the entirety of the room. He can see much more of that room than Wright can see. Now, this room wasn't so obviously corner fed just from the outside. And the moment you open up a door and you identify that it is corner fed, there's nothing wrong with you slicing out a little bit, particularly out to like the 45 to make sure that that wall continues, that it's not like some sort of like quarter wall or something like that, or there's nothing along that wall that you could be holding on, like an open door or something. That's fine. But the moment you hit that 45, let's just say, and you identify that wall continues and that's actually truly a corner fed, then you'd still do the same thing. You check up. Now, one other thing I'll talk about here too, and something that I see all the time in this particular video, is how they're actually attacking corner fed rooms. So they're pretty much always doing conventional entries, meaning the number one man just goes ahead and enters and clears that room as if it was a corner fed. So he's just running along his common wall toward that door, which there's nothing wrong, or from that door, I should say. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. However, there are better ways to attack corner fed rooms, generally speaking. You could either run the rabbit, or do a lateral entry. So basically, instead of running along the wall, you're running a 90-degree angle away from the door. You're doing a lateral entry. So in this case, you're not, if there's like a threat in that corner, you're not running towards him, you're running away from him, which is obviously ideal, particularly when it comes to like CQB. The ranges that you're dealing with are already very, very short. So, from that corner to the door might only be like 3 or 4 meters. So it's obviously very shallow. And when you step in and you take even one step closer towards that corner, you're only closing the distance. So if there is somebody in that corner, you're only making it easier for him to harm you. So in that case, right, doing a lateral entry is nice, but also you can do this via a frame, meaning you attack that corner and clear that corner from the door frame. So you don't completely commit yourself to the room. You just step and clear that threshold just enough to see into that corner. Basically, again, you're attacking it from the frame rather than actually fully making entry into the room, hence why it's called framing. And then from there, you can reorient and work whatever else is within the room. It's just something that I noticed throughout this video, and that's pretty much how they always attacked corners in corner-fed rooms. Anyways, let's move on from this.
I would be real cautious about throwing it on that door frame, right? Because no one's been in that room.
Okay, so right there, this is going to be something I'm going to be explaining that probably a lot of people don't understand what was going on in that particular moment. So Joe, or the instructor, he was like, hey, I'd be very cautious about throwing that light underneath that door. So what that guy on the left-hand side of that hallway was trying to do was he was shining his visible laser underneath a closed door deeper down the hallway. Basically, what he was trying to do is initiate a deconfliction. If you don't know what deconflictions are, I'm not going to take the time to explain them here. I'll have a card somewhere up here. I have an entire video on deconfliction. So if you want to learn more about that, click on that and watch that video. But regardless, the guy on the left-hand side of the hallway, was trying to initiate a deconfliction. And the problem with that is that he was trying to initiate a deconfliction on a door that leads to a room where he doesn't know if they actually have teammates within that room. He doesn't know if a working element has made entry into that room yet and have cleared that room, and he's trying to initiate a deconfliction with it. which is bad because if there is a threat in that room and obviously teammates aren't in there, he's basically triggering that room potentially, which isn't ideal, especially for him because he's just kind of out there in the hallway. He's not in a very good position, like safety-wise. So this is a position where you would not want to receive any sort of contact. So you don't want to be triggering things that you don't have to trigger, especially when you're trying to initiate deconfliction on a door that leads to a room that you have no clue that whether or not teammates have actually been in there or not. So that's what Joe was talking about, and that's why he was kind of giving him a warning there, like, hey, I would not be shining that laser underneath that door. You don't know that if there's been teammates in there yet. So yeah, it's this is generally why I prefer to have working elements initiate deconflictions, because a lot of times they have a better understanding of where they are in terms of like doors that lead back to security elements rather than security elements. They tend to not necessarily have the best essay in terms of where working elements are working, where they might come out of. So generally speaking, I like working elements to initiate decons because if a working element's moving through rooms and they come back and make entry into a room that has a door that may lead back to like a hallway in this case, they'll probably have a better understanding like, oh, that door more than likely leads back to this hallway that we control, rather than the security element somehow magically having awareness in the moment that a working element's in a room that they're holding security on, if that makes sense. On top of that, again, this is a very short clip, so there might be context that I'm missing, of course, that may have them there in the first place. But one thing I would also question too in terms of that particular moment is why the guy on the left-hand side of that hallway was even there in the first place. It might be the case that he was indeed covering an angle for people to move maybe into that room or something. But ideally, again, he's not in a very safe position there. He's just out there in the hallway. And if he doesn't have to be there, then he shouldn't be there. The guy on the right-hand side who is in that threshold or closer to that threshold, he can sit there and hold that hallway from a threshold, which is a far better position to be in than fully exposed in that hallway. So just something else to consider as well. All right, let's move on to the next clip.
Dead space uncleared.
Okay, so a few things to point out. So when they first opened that door, which looked like an external door, and they were slicing that out, you heard a shot, like a shot call. And that's referred to as a shot call. Now, if you don't understand what this is basically, in like really simplistic terms, it's a freeze call. Basically, this is someone calls out a shot call when they are about to take a shot at somebody that is potentially very dangerous to a teammate or teammates. A lot of times this happens in like really tight spaces. Like say you're like holding cross coverage in like a really tight hallway or something, you're moving down and you see somebody, you need to take a shot at somebody, but it's kind of dangerous because you might be shooting over someone's gun or underneath someone's gun or something like that. So you say shot, and it's basically a freeze call. Everybody on the team freezes. If someone says shot, it's freeze. Everyone stops moving. Nobody moves a muscle. And then, of course, someone might take shots, of course, during that time, which was what happened there. And then nobody moves until a move call is made. So, whatever, something happens, someone yells shot, pop, 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 move. And that releases everybody to continue movement. Again, it's typically done when someone's about to take a more, let's just say, reckless shot. Reckless might not be the right word. A more high-risk shot in terms of teammates. Shot calls can be kind of sketchy. They can be kind of sketchy sometimes. What probably happened, and that obviously I can't see them because of the camera angle, but what I assume happened there was that the number 2 man checked to allow his number 1 man in, and as the number 1 man was like stepping to make entry, he saw the target, dropped his muzzle back down, yelled shot, to take shots. Typically, that's what happens on a shot call in that particular circumstance, right? Number one man was like about to make entry. Number two man saw a threat, dropped his muzzle, yelled shot to, hopefully prevent that number one man from like stepping and continuing the entry. He took his shots, and then, obviously they didn't show that in this video, but that number two man probably yelled move and then checked to allow the number one man in, or he made entry, whatever's the case, they continued the entry. Now, the other thing I want to point out in this particular clip is when they made entry, that right guy who was kind of holding down what looked to be a corridor, he was doing some sort of scan, right? He was doing this. And why was he doing that? Well, essentially, he was asking for help. What this means is when you see somebody doing this, it means he's basically communicating to his team that, hey, I am holding on two different threats that I can't effectively hold by myself. I need someone to come in, support me, and take up one of these threats. So this is a support call, essentially. So if I was another guy who was stepping into that threshold and I was looking into this room to kind of maintain link and look at what's going on in this room, and I see my boy doing this, all right, I'm stepping in to go take up one of those threats for him, so that way better security, more efficient security is held. Again, he's asking for support. You see this a few times in this video. Now, unfortunately, sometimes you have to let your boy just kind of sit there and kind of stick it out for a minute or two while you work something else, because until something else is done, it's not safe to put another person in that situation. Sometimes that happens. But ideally, the moment somebody recognizes their teammate doing this, assuming they're not already doing something, of course, somebody should immediately go in and step up and assist that person. So yeah, that's what he was communicating in that particular instance. Yep, parallel train, Rico. Okay, so a lot of things to talk about in this. So first off, one thing I really liked is when that guy was working that weirdly placed doorway, there wasn't another guy like directly up on his ass crowding his space. They just let him work that door, which gave him the most amount of space to actually work. And someone didn't actually step up near him until entry was about to be made. So that was really good. A lot of times you'll see that people overcrowding particular areas that should not be overcrowded when they don't need to be there at all. You're just an extra body that's in the way and a potential casualty. So it was really good to see that. It was kind of interesting when they actually did make entry. The guy who initially sliced out that room, he checked up to allow basically his number two man in, or the other guy who came to assist him and be his number two man. He allowed him to make entry first, be the number one man. And I understand why he did that is because when he sliced out and he put himself in a position that allowed that other guy to come in, and now he had the angle on the deep side of the room, so he just checked up to allow him to have it. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to say it's wrong or anything. Personally, if it was me slicing out that room, I would have still maintained myself being the number one man, because I have the most SA on the room. I'm the one who sliced out the room. I got to see the deep side and the shadow side. So I would have made entry because I just have the most, I would have made entry first because I have the most SA on the room. When he checked up, the guy, who was going to be his number two man, essentially, he didn't get to see that room really prior to that entry. So he's kind of going in there a little bit blind. Again, it's not wrong. I understand why he did it. I personally just would have, if I was that guy who initially sliced out that room, I would have still maintained myself as number one. One other thing here that happened that probably a lot of people may not understand. After that second guy pushed up to assist the guy who was slicing out that room, a third guy was stepping up because he saw that they were about to make entry and he was going to step into that threshold to maintain link. But someone down the hallway called for a +1. He said something along the lines of like, send me one or something like that. He looked and he went to go assist them. What that was is whoever was calling for that down the hall, he was asking for another body. He's like, hey, I need one more person down here for whatever reason. he was asking for support. So, you know, he said, send me one. That guy, he was the closest one there. So he went off to assist them. And then, so yeah, that's what happened there. Moving on to what actually happened inside that room, they made entry. So it was a corner-fed room, obviously, and it had a partial door in there, like a partially open door, I mean. The biggest problem I had with what happened in this room was the guy on the left-hand side of that door, he really put himself on what we call an island, meaning when that door opened up, he had nowhere to go. That corner was already really shallow, and whatever corner there was taken up by that couch. So basically, when that door opened, he was basically directly in front of the door. He's more or less at the 90 degree, and he had nowhere to go from there. So if he had to bail or close his angle or whatever, he has nowhere to go. He put himself in a very dangerous position. Again, he put himself on an island. All right, that's a very isolated corner there. It's not a good position to be in because it very much, well, again, it just puts you on an island. You have nowhere to go. Being able to bail away is very important. And he had nowhere to bail to in the event that he needed to bail, or even just maneuver around that threshold, really. It's just not a good position to put yourself in. So that's something you really want to avoid. Splitting doors is really great. It's very advantageous, and when you can do it, you should do it. However, there are definitely contraindications when it comes to splitting, and isolated shadow corners are one of them. You do not want to put yourself on an island there. Now with that, in this particular case, there are much better positions that he could have put himself in. First off, you know, if you know, you know, he could have held a really good offset on that door actually. So that was an option to him. Or another thing that he could have done was just simply stack up behind whoever was on the right-hand side of the door, gave him a squeeze, and that guy would work that door, and then they would just make entry from there. Now, when they opened up that door and made entry, it was a hallway, and you heard them call it parallel train. What does that mean? Basically, a parallel train is two hallways that run parallel with each other with rooms in the middle. You see this more often in like larger commercial buildings, and you certainly would see in like a residential building. Basically, that's what they're calling it. It's a parallel train. And the big thing here is basically that third guy came into that door after number one, number two man made entry into that hallway. Third guy came in, saw what was going on, saw that it was a parallel train. He had one guy hold, because you don't want to, when you have a parallel train, basically two hallways are parallel with each other, you don't want to be working them simultaneously. You don't want to have working elements working up those hallways simultaneously. That's very dangerous and can lead to really bad fratricide and friendly fire, blue on blue incidents, whatever you want to call it. It's not ideal. So you're going to have one side hold while the other side works up their hallway. So that's what that third guy did. That's the call he made. He's like, hey, parallel train. He called out to someone hold, and then they went back to link back up with the other working elements that were in the other hallway, and they continued working that hallway. So yeah, there's a lot there in that particular clip, but that's all I have to say on that. So let's go ahead and move on. Okay, so one thing I really like about this is you'll notice how far back that guy was from that threshold. He was not up on that door. He had space to utilize, and it was safe to utilize that space. So he was stepped way back off that door. This is ideal. Again, the distances that you are dealing with within CQB are really shallow as is. So if you're up on that door and that door opens and there's a guy, let's just say 4 meters in front of you, that's not a lot of distance to have between you and a threat. So if you have more distance that you can safely utilize from that doorway, so you can take 4 meters and make it into 8 meters, that is nothing but advantageous to you. Now, of course, there are some times where it's not safe to do this, or you simply don't have the space to do it, obviously. In this example, obviously, this is an exterior breach. So a common example where you might not want to use distance would be, let's just say there is a second floor in play, and above that door, there are windows on that second floor. So if you're stepped off, you might have exposure from that second floor. So that may be a contraindication on when you would utilize distance. But generally speaking, distance and angle is all your friend. So if you can be more stepped off that door and create bigger distance from that door, the better. Also, he maintained a lot of that distance as he was slicing out that room. So he didn't just start there and then push up close to the door and then begin slicing out to the rest of the room. He maintained that distance from that door as he was working. And he only closed that distance when he was prepping to make entry. One other thing that I've noticed throughout this video too, which I just find interesting, again, it's not wrong, but it's definitely something I do differently, is they're utilizing simultaneous pans. So when that door opens, both the guy on the left and the right-hand side of that door, they're slicing out simultaneously to the 90-degree and then back to make entry. Again, it's not wrong, but in my opinion, it's better practice to have alternating pans or slices, whatever you want to call it. Meaning when the door opens, you're going to have one side slice out first, and then the other side slices out. It's just there's a bunch of reasons why, in my opinion, that's preferable. I'll probably make like a Patreon exclusive video, if I'm being honest, specifically on why you want to do that and the advantages that gives you. But it's still fairly common to see within the industry of people doing dual pans or simultaneous pans, I should say. And it's fairly common. It's not wrong. And there are times where you want to do that, particularly when it's when you need more of an expedited entry. But generally speaking, it's better to do an alternating slice for a variety of reasons. Okay, so I'm going to pause it real quick there. So same thing as with the other clip. Notice even the guy who opens the door, obviously he has to get close enough to actually open up the door. But when he went up and he actually opened up that door, he didn't just stay close to the door. He backed up and got plenty of distance away from that door and utilized more of that distance that he had available to him. So this doesn't just apply to the guy on the security side, also applies to the guy on the support side too. If he can open up that door and then immediately back off and get more distance from it, all the better. Okay, going back to the whole island talk I gave a little while back ago. Again, you see this a lot in this video. This is something that I just saw and noticed constantly within this video, is that people really putting themselves on islands. They're basically splitting doors that really shouldn't be split. And this is a prime example of it right here. That guy on what would be on like the right-hand side of the screen, he was in a very shallow corner there, very isolated corner. It's not a good position to be in because, again, the moment that door opens, he has nowhere to go. He has nowhere to bail to. He has very limited space to close angles. It's just not a good position. He's really isolating himself there. And it's not ideal. The only place you have to go is basically towards your teammate on the other side of that door. And that is not ideal, particularly under night vision. Your chances of maybe colliding with your teammate or something is relatively high. Possibly fratricide issues too if there's an active engagement going on. There's just a lot of problems with it. And again, this is a prime example of that. This is a door where you would not want to split. Again, splitting is very advantageous, and when you have a door that you can effectively split, you should do so, but there are going to be doors where it's contraindicated and you shouldn't try to force a splitting tactic on a door where you shouldn't, that shouldn't be split. All right, so this is probably the most oof clip of this entire video. This one really confused me in terms of why they took this particular area the way they did. So here they're obviously, you got this working element in one room and they have an immediate hallway in between them and an opposing open door. So what they ended up doing was the first guy, he pushed past the uncleared hallway to make entry into that opposing open door. and the number 2 man button hooked through and took the hallway. Now, again, I'm only dealing with the context that to me is presented within the video, so maybe there was a good reason why they chose to prioritize initially the open opposing door rather than the hallway first. But beyond that, this was very, very dangerous. And for the very reason that you saw in this video, the number 1 man pushed and just bypassed the hallway, triggered the hallway, of course. A threat began engaging him as he was crossing that hallway. Number 2 man hooked through and took the hallway and basically jumped into a gunfight that he didn't start. And, he just got thrown into the middle of this gunfight, which is very dangerous for him because the chances of him taking that hallway and catching rounds that were intended for that number 1 man is very high. So it was just not a great situation. But on top of that, because that number 2 man got into a fight, he slowed down and basically stopped, which basically body blocked that doorway he came through. And that number 3 man basically had to push him out of the way so he could go and make entry with that number 1 man who made entry into that room. And by the time that actually happened, it was too little too late. That number 1 man basically made a 1-man room entry. That's what happened. So again, unless there is some sort of really heavy driving force or stimulus that caused them to really prioritize that open door rather than that hallway, this was just a really weird and very inefficient and very unsafe way to take this particular area. Ideally, the number 1 man would have taken that hallway first, and then number 2 and number 3 man would have taken that open opposing door. There are other ways that this could have been done too, where the number 1 man didn't have to completely commit himself immediately to that hallway. He could have framed and taken that hallway first, and then if it was clear, then he could have stepped out into that hallway. Obviously, in this case, there was an engagement, so he could have framed, right, dealt with that threat, and then pushed back out into the hallway. There are different ways too, but regardless, that hallway should have been taken first over the opposing door. Okay, for this, I'm actually going to go to the whiteboard. I'm going to draw the situation out because I think it'll be easier to explain in terms of what I thought should have been done a little bit differently in this room. So I'm going to go ahead and draw this on the whiteboard, and we'll be right back. All right, so what we saw in that last clip was a fairly complicated room. So this is, to the best of my ability and what I could actually see in the video, this is roughly what this room layout looks like. So what ended up happening was these 2 guys made entry. This 3rd guy, whether he was called in prior or saw that they needed help, he makes entry and he was in the middle. Now, these 2, right, the guys on the left and the right, the number 1, number 2 man, they were holding cross coverage, and the guy in the center also had his muzzle down, probably oriented towards that closed door up here, which is in red. Now, ideally, when it comes to the 3rd man, generally speaking, the 3rd man, or this can also apply to a 4th man too, should be checked up. Because if these 2 guys are in cross coverage, they're probably going to exchange, and if you have your muzzle down as a 3rd man, or again, this also applies to a 3 and 4 man if that applies, you're limiting their options because maybe they want to exchange and then go back to back, whatever. So it complicates things if the 3 man has his muzzle down. So ideally, when that 3rd guy comes in, he's just going to stay checked up to give these guys the most amount of options in terms of how they're going to proceed to work the room. Now, there are times where that 3rd guy will have his muzzle down. Let's just make up a thing. Let's just say we have a compliant guy down on the floor here. He might come in and still hold on him. He'll actually have his muzzle down holding on him while these 2 are in cross coverage, because ideally when these guys exchange, they're not going to go back to back because that would cut his potential line of fire off from this guy. So there are times where the 3rd man will have his muzzle down to prevent these guys from maybe doing something stupid. But regardless, as a general principle, 3rd and 4th man will have their muzzle checked when they make entry. So what they ended up doing in the video is that left and right, they did their exchange. Then green started to take the dead space behind whatever this barricade was. Blue went up and took whatever this dead space was. I don't know if it was like a little corridor or something. I don't know. I'll talk about that here in a second. And then yellow went up and took up security over the door. Now, it wasn't necessarily wrong how they did this, but I personally would have done this a little bit differently. Right, we have three guys. We have dead space here, dead space here, dead space here, and then a closed door. Dead space is always a higher priority than closed doors. So when these two exchanged, both left and right, or green and blue in this case, when these two exchanged and took the dead space that they were responsible for, ideally, I would like the center guy to go up and pin the dead space up here. And then what would have happened is if blue in particular had to hold something, I'll talk about that here in a second because it's kind of unclear in the video. A fourth guy who was looking into the room and saw these guys were all being used and there was no security over this door would come up and pick up that door. Because again, security over this is more important than this, because if this guy pushed up to take the door, now a threat potentially has a good line of fire at this door when people are coming through. Basically, you need to build a bridge between this opposing dead space here for any teammates that are going to make entry into this room. Now, from the video, what it seemed like was that blue took this dead space, and because he kind of put his muzzle down and began to look around, it looked like that, at least again according to his body language, that whatever was over here was clear and that there's nothing else for him to hold on, and he was looking around for more work. Maybe he was just looking around real quick to see what was going on, but again, according to his body language, at least to me, this was clear. So if that was the case, when he pushed up and saw this was clear, and then he looked around and saw that this door didn't have security over it, he would go and pick it up from there in this circumstance. Now, it would be a little bit different, of course, in the way they did it, because the center guy went up and took up security over the door. So if he looked around and saw this and no one already came in to pick this up, then he would go and pick that up, ideally. But regardless, that's personally how I would have done this. So if I was to play it back, in terms of, let's just say, my way, green and blue would exchange. They'd go up, push, take up their dead space. Center would take up and pin the dead space here, right? Blue, seeing that this is clear, he would go ahead and just take up security over the door. It looked like from that video, the guy who represents green, he could see and clear this. He would go ahead and check up, and then yellow, in this case, he would begin clearing this dead space, whatever this led to, and then green would just support him. That's how that would have went. Anyway, so that's all I have from that video from GBRS. I really enjoy these breakdowns, so I plan on doing more episodes here in the near future. This was a pretty great video. Obviously, the St. John's Parish SWAT team here, they're very competent, although I had things to say that I critiqued them on, of course. It's very clear that they're a very competent SWAT team, so kudos to them, and obviously kudos to GBRS for having the opportunity to train and advise them. That's obviously fantastic. But anyways, if there are any particular videos that you would like me to break down, be sure to leave them in the comments or send them to me either on like Instagram or on my email or whatever, and I will certainly consider them, take a look at them, and consider them for future episodes. Anyways, I hope you found this video helpful and informative. If you did, please like and subscribe. Also, consider joining my Patreon. YouTube and its censorship are becoming more hostile to my channel, so I'm really pushing to become more Patreon exclusive as the months go by here. So if that's something you would like, please consider joining my Patreon. Links down in the description below, of course. I'm Tyler Austin from Gungnir Strategic. Thank you so much for watching.